Everybody unmuted. You guys ready to roll? We're live.
Yes.
Paul, nice to have you. I think we may have another one or two people stopping in. And I invited Wayne over. And I tell you the reason why I invited Wayne, Matthew, because I've heard you recently here over the last few weeks, and I found you an extremely entertaining guest. And you've got a lot of insight with this. And you and Wayne together have a lot more insight than I do. So Wayne's
I question that. I think you've got a lot of insight.
Anyway, can you give us the 1 minute background on who Matthew Polly is?
Right. Well, I'm a software engineer of 30 years who wrote a book about some deep state stuff going on in Canada and was soundly silenced and my career taken down and a lot of other serious things happened. And so anyway, since 2020, I've been, living back in Toronto. I had to take a little 2 years living in a remote island to try and get the heat off. But that's why my backdrop is roughly equivalent to where I was out in the island in British Columbia. Makes me feel better. But anyway, so since 2020, I've been following what's going on and deciding to just focus on that and focus on the current thing that's going on. And very quickly realized something was amiss. And I've been involved quite a bit in various sort of freedom groups, but also since the election's gone on, trying to, identify the problems with the election, interference, foreign, domestic, as well as the way it's been carried out, and particularly how the media has taken a bias in this whole thing. But anyway, that's where also Stop C293, I started a committee on that, and there's a number of people working with me, excellent activists, and we've been trying to stop this bill. And even though it's, been kicked down because of the government resetting Parliament, it's still going to be introduced right after C63, I'm sure.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a real pleasure to have you on. I follow a lot of the stuff that you do on X, and if anybody's not following Matthew, he'd be a good one for you to follow. So it's Matthew Polly 13 at X. And we had another person drop in, and I think he's having camera problems, but he'll be back just shortly. So today's big topic, I don't know how much you've got to see that's already been covered so far today, Matthew, is Canada in crisis.
Yes.
And yesterday I was on something else and I was running out of battery time just as you came on, and I was kind of giving myself a slap for not having a backup phone at the time. But this way we get to chat a little bit more. And the other person I'd like to, for folks who don't know, my co-host is Wayne Peters, and Wayne is the host of whatsupcanada.org. And if anybody in Canada understands what happens when you go against the government and what happens with censorship, that would be Mr. Wayne Peters. and Wayne, could you, before we get talking more with Matt and the other guest comes in, could you give the audience your 1 minute pitch?
Oh, geez. I'm a political orphan. I'm just John Average Q Northern Swamp Donkey Canadian who just refuses to be told what I can and cannot say. And about 6 years ago, I decided that a rock could do a better job of truth and dissemination in Canada. So that kind of started my journey with What's Up Canada. I had a long history before that. But from there, it just, I kind of have this Canadian here, hold my beer attitude. What? You told me not to do this. Watch me. And the more they, tried to do the corrupt things that they tried to do, the more they tried to do that, the better they made me and the more motivated they made me. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on, but somebody needs to put it together for others. And this is kind of where we've gotten to, where we are now the enemy of a globalist coup, that if we don't do something now, literally the existence of humanity is at stake, in my opinion. So, that's kind of, I'm just nobody with a big mouth and a bad attitude for globalists, and they don't like me very much for it. And they teach us how to be better.
Well, you're in a growing group, Wayne. There's a positive. So it's safe to say that both of you gentlemen aren't associated with the World Economic Forum. You're not practicing the Cloward-Piven strategy. Neither one of you have been involved with in the banking syndicate, and you don't have any undisclosed connections to 21 major corporations. That's safe to say?
Absolutely.
Nothing to disclose. All right, gentlemen. Well, let's move on with why we're here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon down in, I'm on Canada's East Coast in Nova Scotia for international watchers. And recently Canada underwent a major shift in the lives of all Canadians. And unfortunately, a great many people were caught unawares, and they're going to rue the day that they voted for in the last election. Because right now, this whole everything we're doing today is revolving around the idea of Canada in crisis. And Wayne and I are probably a little older than Matthew, I would highly suggest. And we've seen a lot of things over our lifetime in Canada, but I have never seen a bigger crisis land on the doorstep in Canada than happened to us this week. And I'm still amazed at how many people are blissfully unaware of what's taking place around them. So let me ask you this, Matthew. As we look across Canada and I listen to mainstream media, I can understand why people are blissfully unaware. Can you, from your perspective, talk about the level of censorship and educate our audience on how heavily you think we're being censored? Because you're a victim of censorship. I'm a victim of censorship. Wayne's been heavily censored. Maybe just explain to folks how bad is censorship in Canada, and then we'll move through a series of other questions. Right.
Well, censorship is not a black and white thing. There's the degrees of censorship going on. And I mean, it's fair to say that we're under the most amount of censorship than Canada's ever been under, with a possible exception for short periods of World War II and World War I. At this point, we have, let's take in mind here that the reason why governments do censorship is because to protect their position. Sometimes they claim it's for national security during a war, but it's to protect their position, to try and roll out basically a false narrative, essentially propaganda that's actually lies, to make the public believe something that's in the government's best interest. So, for example, censorship when we had 11 MPs in the Parliament that the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, had found were foreign interfered with. And right away, people were asking, okay, who are these 11 traitorous MPs? And they wouldn't tell us. In fact, shortly thereafter, they prorogued the Parliament. Now, also an important thing to bring up is the fact that in the last 4 years, it started back in 2018 when the Prime Minister Trudeau had started paying public funds to the media organizations. And in the last 4 years, April to April, it's 880 million, including the 100 million Google tax. So 780 of government money plus 100 million tax they did on Google. So that's 880 is close to $1 billion. Now we got to remember, since the internet rolled out back in the late 90s and early 2000s, well, really it was earlier than that, but what happened was there was disintermediation of mainstream media, because now everybody's getting on internet and getting information from other sources and social media and independent news sources. So their profits went down, and a lot of mainstream media, particularly newspapers, went under. So can you imagine that $880 million in the last 4 years alone paid to the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, CTV, of course, Global Media, and of course the 1.2 or something trillion or $1 billion that's going to the CBC. Of course, if your profitability is near zero or even less, and now you're getting millions of dollars from the government, so now your shareholders, your CEO is happy. Do you think they're going to actually be independent? No. I mean, the whole point of the only way you can be independent as a media source is if you're not taking money from the government. And so what's happened is people have been blissfully unaware of the level to which the Liberal government in the last 9 years has completely devastated. By the way, I'm getting serious feedback echo, but has devastated the economy. I mean, I think people I've seen that, food's gone up. Was it, Peter, you did some stats the other day, it was about 37% since 2019. So we're seeing massive amounts of people struggling at food banks and all that, and people aren't aware of what's causing it. It's just this generic term floating around about inflation. Well, inflation is because the government has been printing billions and billions of dollars. In early 2020s, up to 240 billion, I believe it was, they spent printed money to pay healthy people to stay at home and not work. Not to mention, $11 billion in gender programs overseas and $10 billion for an overseas war we have nothing to do with. Just massive amounts of money being spent. And that has created the out of control inflation. This is part of the globalist plan, as per the Cloward-Piven strategy, which you are a great explainer of, and I appreciate you explaining that to people. People need to understand that the Trudeau government is not a national government representing Canada. It's a transnational government representing a bunch of people in Davos. They have a plan, and they've been executing that plan, and they're destroying and basically taking all of the wealth out of the middle class. That's why they're purposely creating inflation to purposely cause people not to be able to afford the food and the fuel and housing. And then they come out with the solutions, which is, what Carney's saying. Oh, we're going to build 50,000 homes. Oh, really? So now that we're going communist, are we? Where the government is now the home builders instead of the independent home builders? And furthermore, what is it a coincidence that Carney's company, that he's very intimately tied with Brookfield, with his holdings now in Bermuda, in a tax shelter, has bought a $6 billion Chinese company that makes these prefab modular homes, which will be basically like glorified trailer parks. Not to mention the other thing that he's proposed, right, which is this small nuclear reactors. Well, it so happens that Brookfield owns a big chunk of Westinghouse, which makes the small nuclear reactors. What we've seen with these other globalist governments in the UK and Sweden, Germany, France, you name it, they're all over Western Europe. The same deal. They slip in people who are, including the Trudeau cabinet, many of them World Economic Forum, young global leaders. They slip these people in, and they basically make tons of money, these top-level people that are these top globalists. And that's what's happening. And Canadians are being basically completely snookered by the mainstream media. And it's very, very, it's criminal, really.
Care to comment, Wayne?
Well, so much in there, like, where to actually start on this? I mean, you and I did a podcast not long ago in New Zealand, where I described Mark Carney as perhaps the most corrupt individual Canada has ever produced. Like, I mean, looking at the $5 billion in tax evasion and all of these other things, it's kind of hit the news today that Mark Carney's wife, her book is already available on Amazon, the biography of Diana Carney, from economist to First Lady of Canada, already for sale. Like, how much insight and insider information do you have to be able to pull that off? So I think it's almost time to take this to it. We can sit here and spend endless hours talking about the symptoms of the wound that's been impacted. And I've never moved from my moral values ever, but my classification in the eyes of our overlords certainly has. In the 70s or 80s, I probably would have been thought of as a liberal, and then a conservative, and then a libertarian, and now an anarchist. And at the end of the day, I haven't changed one bit, but the entire spectrum that we live in has altered dramatically. And they have moved this to a point, thankfully, I have to say, although there's monumental more suffering coming, but they have exposed themselves to the point where too many people, and this is why people will say I'm an anarchist, too many people flat out realize that our elections are nothing more than a game that the king allows us to play intermittently so that we think we actually have some output in this, in our daily lives, while a bunch of lobbyists compete to see who can be the manager of the king's asset. And that's literally, how I've come to look at Canadian politics, which is in a very negative way. But this is where, whether people identify it as such or not, we've gotten to a point here now where the corruption levels have been exposed to the point that we are, literally in a unity crisis, if you want to call it that, manufactured or not. They use, Carney and the socialists use the term manufactured decline, where I started calling it a manufactured destabilization 5 years ago, because this stuff has been absolutely on the books. The plan has been out there for a long time. This isn't just a coup of Canada. They're making their big move on the whole world, and it's flopping badly. So they are doubling down on the unicorn country, which is Canada. And Canada's supposed to be the shiny example of how socialism and communism can work this time, New World Order government. But I don't think it's going quite according to plan, because instead we're going to end up facing the balkanization of our country, which literally means the shattering into a bunch of much smaller countries. So now we've got a legitimate problem in Canada that has far greater international impacts than I think people even realize. There is a lot of chaos that comes to Canada over this, but this is what makes it a Commonwealth crisis, because we're a G7 country. When was the last G7 country in the world to implode on itself that we can look back and see a model of as to what's going to happen after that? The rules are set to be shattered, and I think that's kind of why we have the king coming to try and put a nice shiny wrapper on all of this, and so the mercenaries in media can pretend that Mark Carney can save the unity of Canada and make it all better.
So guys, for full disclosure, I'd like to mention that Wayne is from Alberta, and him and I, we really we don't have what we would call down here in Nova Scotia a real shine on for the king, who's coming over here now to dictate to us. I kind of thought, I grew up in Nova Scotia thinking this was a free country, but look what just happened with proroguement of Parliament, and the parliamentary system just doesn't work the way it was ever intended to. So yeah. let's time just blows by when we get on these conversations, guys. So the big issue today, Wayne being from Alberta and Matthew being from Central Canada and me being from Eastern Canada, and we had another guest from guest from Alberta, and he had some difficulty getting through. Right now, for the first time, really, there's always been talk of, since I was a kid, right, back in the 70s and the 80s, talking about, well, Alberta's not happy with things going on in Canada. But for the first time, really hardcore, Canada, in my mind, runs the risk of breaking up. And I can't blame the folks out in Alberta. And when I look here in Eastern Canada, a lot of people aren't aware that when Alberta leaves, Atlantic Canada goes bankrupt, and Quebec will also separate, because Quebec, without transfer payments, has zero reason to stay affiliated with Canada. Nobody in their right mind is going to walk away from $150,000 million annually when they can get everything that they want. When Alberta leaves and takes their transfer payments, Nova Scotia gets 25% of our annual budget from welfare checks, basically, is how we'll we have to call them what they are. Nova Scotia gets welfare checks from Alberta. And the reason being is because the premiers of Nova Scotia want to keep our resources locked up. And for political gain, they don't want to get involved in fracking. We have 3 trillion feet of natural gas locked in central Nova Scotia. We should be an energy-rich province, paying half what we pay for our power bills. I've mentioned this many times. We have the second largest uranium deposit in Canada, second only to Saskatchewan. And here's Mark Carney. We need to get involved in this. Well, no one can force the Atlantic premiers to use their resources as long as they're getting massive welfare payments. And I feel bad for the people. Well, I don't feel bad anymore, because remaining ignorant today is a choice. I mean, the greatest information tool in the history of mankind, we all have at our fingertips, even on our cell phone. There's nothing that you can't find, right? So what we're looking at, guys, is right now, in the last couple of days, there's been more activity that came out of Alberta to make separation an actual reality. And it looks like it's a possibility, because Quebec in 1998 gifted Canada a Supreme Court ruling that's going to make it easy, or a lot easier for Alberta to say, we are not going to spend the next 4 years with the boot, the basically the communist style boot of tyranny on our neck and on our face 24 hours a day. It's much like George Orwell. So just picture yourself with a work boot or a military style boot on your face every day, 24 hours a day for the rest of your life. And that's what the Cloward-Piven strategy, being orchestrated by the people who pulled the levers, who inserted Mark Carney and his wife, who's every bit as radical, if not more so, to him. And what we're looking at, Matthew, I'd like you to comment on the feelings that people have in central Canada, and then we'll go to you, Wayne, and you can talk about your home country out there, where I've got a sister and my youngest daughter out there right now.
Sure. First of all, I just want to correct something. I actually grew up in Saskatchewan, in Regina, Saskatchewan, from the age of 2 until the age of 16. And I consider myself a Westerner that moved to Ontario to go to university and stayed because that was where the economic opportunity was in my profession, which was software engineering. And I still feel very tied to Western sentiments. And I think that your comments are absolutely dead on. We've never been in a situation like this. Alberta is ready to go, and can you blame them? No. Look at the amount of transfer payments they're keeping, this basically welfare system going for some provinces that don't really need it, like Quebec, $16 billion a year. Not to mention, it's just outrageous that the government has said, in addition to having to pay all your money or a good chunk of your money to other parts of Canada, you've got to stop oil and gas development. No more pipelines, and no more, new development of the oil sands. No more really, making money. Our country, as just a real refresher for people, 80% of the population is with 200 miles of the U.S. border. We are a large, massive land. Our population density is not very high. The amount of natural resources we have, we should be living like the Saudis right now, who get like 150,000 USD each citizen per year. They are wealthy. I stopped in Saudi Arabia actually briefly, or just for 10 hours in a flight, and I'm telling you, it's outrageous that Canadians are being disenfranchised of their natural skills and abilities to earn wealth, to have an entrepreneurial class that's successful. And when we have all these resources available to go, and they're being, the Trudeau is saying to visiting heads of state, saying we'd like to make a deal on natural gas, which, by the way, is the cleanest burning, fuel. There's no business case for that, he says. So what are they doing? They're printing so much money that they're creating massive inflation, and people are being, obviously, becoming poor. So of course Alberta is going to separate. I have no doubt. No doubt. The only reason they wouldn't is if there's actually some major conflict. I mean, let's not forget that Carney, one of the first things he did after he, was appointed prime minister, was go all around Europe visiting these fellow globalist countries and get security arrangements to be tough against the Americans, because the issue is going to come up if Alberta successfully gets that 51% out of the 6 provinces plus 1 territory, and was it 51%? There's going to be an existential crisis to Canada, and I'm sure Carney's going to do whatever he wants. I mean, the Trudeau Liberal government, which he was directing, don't forget, for the last 5 years, have changed the law so that the military can be used against the people. And that's when you could see the Americans saying, whoa, 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 And so anyway, there's a possibility there. But anyway, I pass Mike.
Go ahead, Wayne. Alberta boy.
I'm an Albertan, and you already mentioned that. So, I mean, I grew up through the repercussions of the first blatantly communist bill put into Canada, which was the Equalization Act, which allowed the East to not develop any of their resources or industry, and instead create an extra, not called carbon tax, but Eastern tax, basically to the tune of $700 billion since its inception from Alberta, that's been stolen from the people of Alberta. So given what we'd seen over the last number of years out west, this insanity, all insanity is unsustainable sooner or later, and nothing in this election was a surprise outcome to anybody that had been watching, anything outside of the approved narrative. All of this stuff was almost predictable. I mean, like Lisa said it in the last segment, congratulations, Chairman Xi, on running a great election here in Canada. Yep. You won, through hook or by crook. But the interesting part of that is I don't think people have quite made the next step yet as to how that infiltration has infected Canada, but not just Canada. That is what's happening with the United Nations. That is what's happening with the majority of the countries under these pseudo non-binding agreements that our dancers in our legislative bodies do the bidding of to implement the policies in our nations. So they have lied to us for decades and generations. And Peter, last Saturday's Freedom Train discussion with those two CSIS agents, that has haunted me every day since we had that discussion. That one question that I asked them really made it so crystal clear to me, that Canada is not a serious country, has not been for the majority of 40 years. Every one of our prime ministers has been utterly compromised. And then to hear from their own lips that it was literally Justin Trudeau that severed intelligence from agency in our country and neutered both of them in order to specifically create a shield under plausibility and plausible deniability to maintain the continuity of a corrupt syndicate posing as government. And they said yes. I actually thought that was the impossible question to get an answer for, and both of them said yes. So I don't know how much more clear we can understand that this is, a well-functioning coup of a criminal syndicate posing as government under the auspices of foreign unelected agents, and how anybody should be surprised with the outcome and not expect things to get exponentially worse in a magnitude of order of speed that is going to be almost unmanageable for the average human psyche.
I'd like to clear something up for the audience too, guys. So one of the guests we had on last week, he was the former head of the Pacific Asia sector for CSIS, which is Canada's top spy agency, comparable to MI6 or the CIA in the US. Without teeth, though, the difference being when Justin Trudeau's dad set up CSIS, they can only report to the PMO's office and the Minister of Justice. And they have very strict rules, because the question Wayne and I and a lot of people ask is, why aren't politicians that are criminals, why do we not see them in orange jumpsuits, getting fingerprinted and mugshot and going to jail? And the reason being is because, and they laid this out in a massive public forum. I mean, we had small, just 2-minute segments that went viral. And so this head of CSIS said, well, we're not allowed to give evidence in court ever. When we find crime, which we find on an ongoing basis, he exposed all the former prime ministers, and then that former head of CSIS said there wasn't just 11 people that were corrupted in Parliament. There's over 50. So in this election, people had an opportunity to vote for 50 traitors inside Parliament without your knowledge. For all you know, you went in, thought he was a good guy, and nobody's allowed to say anything. So he said what happens is, during the election, Pierre Poilievre would not go in and sign a gag order, which was increased at a heightened security level. And so the gentleman from CSIS said, well, there's a very good reason for that. And it was a brilliant move to not do it, because now he's not gagged, because when CSIS goes in and that information gets passed off to the Prime Minister's office or to the Minister of Justice, they, at that point, they can no longer discuss it under Canada's Secrets Act. And so what happens is Pierre Poilievre didn't sign that so he could speak to the level of corruption. Both of these men, one of them had been in RCMP for 30 years, and he finished out his career as the head of Proceeds of Crime. These are two of the top people in Canada who understand corruption inside government, and they were aghast at the level of corruption inside our parliamentary system and with our politicians. And because it's the Prime Minister's office or the Prime Minister himself or the Minister of Justice who decides who gets prosecuted, because irregardless of what evidence that they're given by CSIS, if they give the evidence to the RCMP, because of recent rulings by left-wing liberal Supreme Court judges, even if you're being wiretapped, people have to be told that you're being monitored, right? So CSIS can do things that the RCMP can't do, but when they tell RCMP, here's what we found, the RCMP can't use the evidence against people. And that's why one agency knows that our government is full of criminals, and our policing agency, who's now controlled by the PMO, and they're supposed to be separate, because the head of the RCMP is actually appointed by the Prime Minister's office, they categorically cannot and will not do their job. They will not bite the hand that feeds them. When was the last time a politician in Canada ended up in jail? You know, the average person on the street goes into a gas station, steals a pack of cigarettes, and they're going to probably do 2 years in jail, right? And well, I guess not recently under new liberal laws, they'll probably be back out on the street. But what I'm saying is everybody is so frustrated and demoralized about what they're seeing, and no more so than the people in Alberta as to what's happened to them. Danielle Smith just gave a list of, I think, 6 items through to Mark Carney and said flat out, we will not be trampled. We will not be held back. You are not destroying our economy any further. We are fighting back. And basically, it looks like the gears are in motion to the point that I don't think they're going to be able to stop what's coming now. Your thoughts on that, Matthew?
You're muted there. You're muted there, Matthew. I just want to throw in a 30-second here on that. On election night, Peter. On election night, Peter, you heard me say that Canada can't have Mark Carney and Alberta too. That I suspect by 9 o'clock in the morning, the paperwork for separation would be underway, and I was 100% on point with that. But it wasn't even just underway; it's underway like a freight train. So sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, Matthew.
First of all, before I forget, everybody, if we realize that this problem is that people are getting wrong information from mainstream media, I just want to remind everybody to not only follow Freedom Train International, which is really important and is doing these kinds of panels, but also Wayne Peters, whatsupcanada.org. His daily show, Monday through Friday, is an outstanding revelation of actual unbiased truth of what's going on in this country. And it's the kind of show that, it wakes up Canadians and gives them actual, really important information that they will never get in the mainstream media. It's very important. Now, back to your question. I concur exactly with Wayne on this one. It's a foregone conclusion that, unless there's some sort of new variable that comes into play, why would Albertans possibly want to stay? For example, the reaction they've had, if we go, Rebel News is the only one who's actually put together a clip of about 3 minutes long, stopping people on the street in Calgary, just like one after another. There's dozens of people they stopped. Uniformly, people are just so fed up. They're angry. That how is it that Eastern Canada elected the Liberals again? And they came up with the whole thing about, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and think you're going to get a different result. And, the people are just furious. And I actually worked in Calgary at Bankers Hall, consulting in 1990 for a year. I love Calgary. I love the people there. They have a lot in common with, Westerners generally. And that kind of independent spirit that you see in the States, in Texas, because it's all oil and gas out there, right? Yeah. Why will they stay? I couldn't, for the life of me, can't see why they would stay. So, yeah, I think it's a foregone conclusion. And it's an existential crisis for Canada, because once they exit, that's it. As you point out, Nova Scotia will be bankrupt in 24 hours. And certainly Quebec is going to exit because they're not going to be getting their $16 billion anymore. So, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So one of the things I want to mention to people that are watching is Mark Carney wrote a book, and it's called Values. And Mark Carney also wrote another book that Penguin books decided not to release prior to the election. And I think it's called Hinged. To me, it's unhinged. I mean, Mark Carney's unhinged. But if anybody would take the time to go read Mark Carney's book, and the last thing I want to do is put more money in that fellow's pocket, right? But if you can borrow a copy rather than buy it of Mark Carney's book Values, I mean, every single thing the man is planning to do is laid out in the book. It's in your face. You'd have to be illiterate to read his book and not realize this guy is determined to destroy Canada. Everything about his life is revolving around net zero. And when he got involved with that, is it called F-FANGs, or I forget what the thing.
GFANs.
Yes, GFANs. So when he got involved with GFAN, he convinced like some of the world's top bankers and investment and hedge funds to get involved in DEI and ESG. So ESG is like equity and social justice. And so equity and social governance. And it failed miserably. And all those people who got roped in by Mark Carney, I mean, these are some of the biggest players in the world. They just dropped it all. They just dropped it like a hot potato here in the last few months. And then they said, well, Mark, that's not working. We need you to get in and finish off the job that Trudeau couldn't get done. And don't take my word for it. Go do the research on the man. And what you're going to find out is that not only is he capable of bringing back emergency measures and putting that boot of tyranny on anybody's neck who's speaking out, he's actually giddy. He's actually excited over the opportunity to be able to do it. It'd be hard to convince a man like me, who used to do law enforcement, that when the plan was changed last year to be able to use military against our citizens, that all of this was part of the planning process.
Absolutely.
So people need to do some research and understand just how serious this is. And that's why we're calling this episode Canada in Crisis. Wayne, over to you.
You know, you were with me covering the election and the problematic issues and irregularities. I think have only just begun to be looked into, shall we say. But the parallels to what happened in 2020 when Biden magically won in what seemed like a foregone conclusion come from behind, and what Kamala was in their election. And I would caution Americans take note of the similarities as this goes, because Canada got what you were supposed to. And whether you like Trump or not, he, in that very fact alone, he became the great disruptor. And the American people saw, it wasn't whether, it was about Trump or not. They saw through the construct that Kamala and the Democrats are and the evil and darkness that they represent. So even though they may have had to leave their traditional party loyalties, that was what the reality of why people were changing and why they ultimately ended up with Trump. Well, Canada didn't dodge that bullet. And Mark Carney and everything about him and this election was a manufactured conclusion. This was an appointment and a coronation. As I said earlier, and this is why I started describing it as the King's game that we are allowed to play to provide the illusion of democracy so that they can maintain the continuity of the crime syndicate. And that's exactly what happened here in Canada. So if you guys, Americans, 2 points to this. Americans, this is what you dodged, and the rest of the world, this is what you're getting. So this is what makes Canada such a problem to the Commonwealth crisis that's going to come, because this is how desperate they're going to be to try to stop the West from putting basically a big old stick in the front wheel of their Mercedes and making it do a flip-flop, because that's the challenge now, is they have to keep the continuity of the crime spree going. And this is the threat. And if Canada, coming back to Canada being a G7 nation, the prime jewel of the King's assets, What are they going to be willing to do about that? How extreme are they willing to get? The intelligence agencies have already, planted the seed of mass discontent in Canada. This is the crisis that is coming throughout the entire Commonwealth. It's coming out Australia, their election, exactly carbon blueprint of the shenanigans up here that worked in Canada, failed in the USA. So tally ho for the Westerners.
So, guys, right now, we've gone through 3/4 of the hour already. I'm going to cover something for 2 minutes that Canadians can understand how badly we're being snookered and robbed. And it's about everything that Mark Carney is doing. The day after he was elected, he had the gall to stand up and say, I was just given a major mandate to be able to bring in net zero. He didn't get a mandate to do anything. He's got a minority government. And so he was talking about net zero. And I'm going to give you some numbers. And I sent some data through to Matthew. So a couple of years ago, I found data on government websites. I thought it was Stats Canada. It's gone now. So I found it from other sources again today. I did more research on it because I made some comments on this the other day. Canada has the second largest forests in the world. Using AI and the latest techniques they estimate that Canada has 318 billion trees that on average absorb 42 or 44 pounds of CO2 per tree. In Canada, we have 8 forest regions, and across all regions and across all averages, we have forests that suck up over 15 trillion pounds of CO2. Now, today I got in and I was looking at some conflicting data because the people who create the climate agenda disagree with that. So let's say that forests, I'm not going to argue with them over this because they do agree to this number, that we suck up at least 7 million pounds of CO2. Or trillion pounds of CO2. Then I get into the data searching and said, well, how much CO2 is generated by human beings in Canada? Not by forest fire, none of those things. What do we as a society in Canada actually generate? And we generate 1.6 trillion pounds of CO2. Well, the problem is according to all the data, you can go on to Grok, you can use ChatGPT you can do your own research, and I hope you do. Because it's going to tell you, I thought the number was 9%, but they modified it here to try to make things look, well, not so bad. So what they're saying now, and this is all the world's best AI, is that Canada only needs 11% of its forest to suck up all the man-made CO2 in Canada. Canada, by the government's own data, is net zero. Every single thing that Mark Carney wants to do, to tax our gas, to kill oil, to build little bitty houses, take away your car, tack another $20,000 on a car here in a few years if it's not electric. Every insane lunatic policy this man is about to bury us in debt with, another $250 billion in debt, is based on absolute nonsense, based on the government's own numbers. Imagine it only takes 11% of our forests to eat up all of the CO2. So feel free to comment, gentlemen. Matthew?
Yes, I'm dying to talk. This is the whole idea of Canada having to, go into take away all of our wealth, basically, and charge these humongous carbon taxes. By the way, when you put a tax on energy, any economist will tell you, energy costs are the single most powerful determiner of wealth in a country. When you increase energy costs, everything slows down in the economy. By doing this, it's outrageous, number one. Number two, we, as you say, the data is right there. It's science. It's all the data is there. We absorb far more CO2 in this country than we'd ever emit. In fact, again, most of our population's within 200 miles of the border. We've got these vast country full of trees, and they sequester CO2. Third point, the whole idea that man-made CO2 causes climate boiling is absolute hogwash. There is not adequate science whatsoever to suggest this. This whole thing was thought up by the same, Club of 300 or Committee of 300, bunch of globalists back in the 1960s. This was a way to dispossess the middle class of their wealth. If you look at the IPC, this UN thing that says that, there's all these scientists that say that man-made CO2 is going to cause the boiling of the planet and all this crap. You got to remember, these people are in a publish or perish, of academic environment, getting money from the oil companies, who, by the way, make a lot of money in carbon sequestration technology, and from the governments. And they all have to say this narrative, or they don't actually be able to publish and get their research done, and therefore maybe get a tenure track position. So the whole idea of CO2 causing man-made climate change, very, very not supported by science. And finally, let's not forget that what they've done to us, we have the lowest per capita GDP growth in the entire G20. We are already much poorer than we were. And this started in 2015. As soon as the Liberals took power, we started diverging from the Americans, who continued to have GDP growth, and we didn't. And now we have a spread of 20 points. So we're already suffering immensely. If he goes through with this, and this net zero, we're going to lose our home equity. He's going to need trillions, at least $5 trillion to do this. So goodbye to your houses.
Yeah, that's on the books right now. So people that aren't aware, they've already done the paperwork. And if you just filled out your taxes this year, they want to know, what did you pay for your house, right? How much equity do you have in it? Well, why do you think the government's asking that? They have a plan in place for all the boomers that went and voted for it, got sucked in. I'll give you an example, guys. If you're in Vancouver and you bought a house out there 30 years ago for $100,000 and now it's worth $2 million, that means you've got $1,900,000 in equity. And if they charge you a capital gains tax, which is what they are looking to do, thank God they didn't get a majority, because it won't be 10, 15%. It'll be probably a 30% capital gain tax. And I'm 1.9 million, guys. I mean, they're just going to outright steal it from you. And all these people that need that money to retire, they're not going to have it. Wayne, back to you, buddy.
Nobody is positioned better to profit from the eco and climate terrorism. So that's the only terminology that I'll use to describe it, because the climate science is fraud. So this is nothing but climate and eco terrorism. And here's the funny part is, and Matthew, you nailed it. The cost of energy. The two priorities for any nation to be prosperous is an access to an abundance of energy and an access to abundance of food. Canada is the wealthiest per capita in those resources anywhere on the planet, bar none. So why do they seek to cap all of that with this eco-terrorism? Steve Bono, follow the money. Who benefits? Who builds every piece of crap compliant to this eco-terrorism? China. So while they're building coal factories and building hydroelectric dams and all of these things, so they can triple their output on manufacturing for all of the green energy, techno science, blah, 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 to enforce the climate terrorism on our innocent and unsuspecting societies. We have these same infiltrators making it policy in our governments to be beholden to said extortion and terrorism, as evidenced by Bill C-293, where literally every blade of grass and every cubic foot of oxygen that you breathe is going to have a carbon quota attached to it that's going to be dependent on leave us dependent, because how dare you have a couple of extra eggs and sell a couple of extra eggs? They'll send SWAT teams out to shut you down in Canada for that. Literally, no joke, happening right now in Canada. Yeah. So this is the unrestricted warfare that's being waged on our country, and it's it's the same blueprint across so many spectrums of it. Whether we were talking earlier about the different industries. It's not just the different industries. It's about our societies at every industry, every facet and aspect of it. And get a guy released on his own recognizance after stabbing two women in the head after renting them a room at an Airbnb. Meanwhile, for honking their horns, people are still being persecuted after the government spent tens of millions of dollars prosecuting them, and they're still facing lawsuits of $400 million because they dared to encourage bouncy castles against the oppression. Again, back to that warning. Canada, and Alex Newman said it too. Canada is the canary in the coal mine. If they get away with this in Canada, they're coming for you next.
Guys, we're right down to the last 5 minutes.
Yes. I want to just put one little piece of positive news before I get a little negative. We do know now that the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's daughter, has become a whistleblower, and she's giving testimony to talk about the genocidal plans of these globalists. And this is going to lead to potentially to persecutions. This could start unraveling things. So that's cause for hope, number one. Number two, this whole idea of by hook or by crook, I actually posted that myself too, Wayne, about 2 weeks ago, saying I know they're going to win by hook or by crook. And we're seeing more of the crook, in my opinion, by the way. 100%. What is it? What is it with they're so close? They were at 169, and now they got another seat because they say the counts flipped. It was like all of a sudden 400 conservative votes had to be squashed because they were challenged, and they decided not to, I am not very. I want to see transparency. I want to see accountability. I want to know when those mail-in ballots were counted by, and who was in Ottawa counting them. Were there scrutineers from the parties? Was there matching of the IDs and everything? Make sure it's legit. And finally, that this whole idea of 293 and C63. This is what's coming, folks, and we're going to be banned from speaking. Wayne and other whistleblowers like myself too, we're going to potentially be in jail because somebody says that something we said in some post 10 years ago makes them feel afraid, and Human Rights Tribunal with 98% conviction rate is going to put us in jail. And this has already happened. Look what's happening in the UK. And by the way, we're not the first. We're just the current. We're on the global stage right now for this coup d'état. But it's already happened in the UK, right? Thousands of people in jail for Facebook posts. You're seeing, rape gangs, going, in and out of jail, bail, no problem, because the two-tier justice system. We can expect we're already higher rate of crime than America for the first time, both in non-violent and violent, and it's going to get worse. We need to put pressure on the provincial governments. They have a vested interest in not getting booted in the next election. We need to put pressure on them to opt out of these and say to the federal government, we are not in this. Show the legal reasons why they can't do this to us. And finally, just people need to get involved. Start getting good media sources. Pass them along to your friends, neighbors, family, and especially What's Up Canada and Freedom Train International and other independent voices in Canada, and start working together. Get engaged now, because it's your family's future, your children's future that's at stake. Thank you.
So one of the best things you can do, guys, I was on a Spaces yesterday, and there was a gentleman from Germany. He was saying, what's the best thing we can do to help one another out? The best thing you can do is follow one another. Follow Wayne at What's Up Canada. Follow me at Peter R. McIsaac. That's my X handle. Follow Matthew, and then find other people when you hear them talking and they're like-minded and they're talking some common sense. Well, follow them, right? I mean, literally, when my wife had to work before she could retire, she didn't have time to do the research that some of us have time to do. And so a lot of people are woefully uneducated and don't realize that, and a lot of people in Canada suffer from this. They don't know that they don't know, but they think they know.
Exactly.
And it's tragic. Exactly. So you know what? Don't give up on your friends. And the best way to maybe deal with them is ask open-ended questions. Because once people dig in, it's really hard to change their mind. Just ask a common sense question and don't answer it for them. Force them to think for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave you with one other thing before I let Wayne. I'm going to let Wayne close this off. We're down to the last 2 minutes. Is that Al Gore? I mean, he's right on track there with Mark Carney, and they're saying the oceans are boiling. So here on the West Coast, or on the East Coast, if you go bankrupt, you should just be able to start a new business, walk along the beach, and gather up the cooked lobsters, right?
And don't forget, he made $1 billion in a carbon trading company as a result of his whole climate change alarmism. Just like Carney's making big bank, and so is John Kerry. Go ahead.
Absolute insanity, guys. Wayne, wrap her up, buddy.
Oh, geez. as dark as sometimes the subject matter, it seems, and as massive as it is, that's that just brings out the best in me. That brings me back to the you hit like a girl. You can't fix what you can't see. You can't solve a problem you don't know exists. And we are really, as a nation, and this is where caring about other nations, part of being a Canadian to me is being proud of the heritage of my country, and that's been squashed for a very long time. And it's sad to me that Canadians don't understand that when we do something of significance for a moral and ethical value, that when Canadians stand up and do something, the rest of the world follows. And don't be surprised at some of the things you're going to see being manifested in lies and propaganda and abuse and all of these things. This is by design, and I'm proud of the people that do what they do all across the world. And to me, this is what makes this platform so important, is that it lets people see that what's happening here is happening there. It's the same thing. It provides so much evidence to to the abuses and the atrocities being waged across the world. So always excited to get to take part with some of these amazing conversations in a time and place where it's challenging to do so. So thank you guys for taking the time to do this on a Saturday. And there's going to be another segment.
Yeah. Last 10 seconds, one word answer. Matthew, do you think Alberta's going to separate?
100%.
Wayne?
Can't do one. Attempt.
Okay.
They're going to attempt. Absolutely.
Yeah. He's right. He's right. They might want to, but be stopped.
At the end of the day, this isn't going to be like a magic button, go in, sign a mortgage, and you get to do this. I think we are just at the beginning of the discussions about things that are going to bring so much. It's going to be challenging because people are going to have to understand our country better in order to be adequately equipped for the conversations that are coming.
All right, guys, stay tuned for the next hours. Buckle up. And if you haven't live stream to your folks, because the next hour will be every bit as good as the last three. Thanks for joining us, and keep up the good fight.
Thank you.